Chapter 48, War. It was called the Great War. Later it became the First World War. It began in Europe in 1914. At first, the Central Powers, Germany, Austria, and Turkey, fought the Allies, England, France, and Russia. Before it was finished, many other nations were involved. It was unnecessary, as most wars are, and it came about because of national pride and the struggle of the huge empires for power and territory and economic gain. Like the Civil War in America, it became ugly and hateful. 9 million men died, more than the whole population of New York City today. It left scars and wounds that refused to heal. It changed the fate of the world, but no one knew that when it started. In England, young men hurried to enlist, afraid the war would be over before they got a chance to fight. No one believed it would last long. Wilson called the war a distant event. He, too, thought it would soon be over. That was a big miscalculation. World War I was worse than anyone could have dreamed. Many of those 19th century inventions which people thought would prevent war were turned to killing. Airplanes shot at each other overhead. Machine guns cracked their deadly staccato. Submarines ejected killer torpedoes, and poison gas turned men blind or unable to breathe. But the killing machines didn't seem to make much difference. It was men, huge armies of men, that determined the outcome. Armies of men who dug themselves into trenches and shot at enemies in other trenches. Both sides fought on, stuck in bloody mud for 4 years. They wasted a generation of young men. The United States had the vast Atlantic Ocean as a moat to keep it isolated from Europe's troubles. Washington and Jefferson had warned the nation to stay away from the Old World and its problems. Most Americans had no interest in Europe's fight. But America was now a world power. It became harder and harder not to be involved. Woodrow Wilson wanted to be a peacemaker. He tried talking to leaders on both sides. He tried to end the war. But Germany insisted on being given French and Polish land before it would stop fighting. France and Russia, which ruled most of Poland, wouldn't agree to that. Woodrow Wilson believed America should stay out of the battle. He wanted the nation not to take sides, to remain neutral. He remembered the Civil War from his Southern childhood. He knew how awful the effects of war could be. But when German troops marched on peaceful Belgium, many Americans became angry. Then, when German submarines called U-boats began sinking ships, even passenger ships, Americans were horrified. In past wars, there had been rules of fair play. Ships were given warning, and passengers allowed time to get into lifeboats. The submarines gave no warnings. Meanwhile, Mexico was having a revolution. Some called it a civil war. When Mexican bands began raiding small towns and ranches in the United States, President Wilson sent General John Pershing south of the border. For a while, it looked as if the United States might go to war with Mexico, and that was exactly what Germany hoped for. The sinking of the Lusitania. On May 1, 1915, the German embassy in Washington placed an advertisement in the leading New York newspapers. The ad said, "Travelers intending to embark on an Atlantic voyage are reminded that a state of war exists between Germany and Great Britain. Vessels flying the British flag are liable to destruction." This warning was published next to an advertisement for a British liner, the Lusitania, fastest and largest steamer now in Atlantic service. The same morning, the luxurious Lusitania set sail for England, filled with tourists, business people, and others who wanted to get to England. You couldn't go by plane then. Many of the voyagers were nervous about the trip, but passenger ships had traditionally been safe from military attack. 6 days later, within sight of the Irish coast, most were preparing for a festive last evening dinner. A German submarine, the U-20, was about to cancel the meal. A single torpedo was fired without warning. 18 minutes later, the Lusitania was beneath the waves. Of 2,000 passengers, 1,198 drowned, innocent victims of war. Among the passengers killed were 198 Americans. The captain, who ignored official warnings and instructions, was washed from the deck and saved. In 1917, Germany declared war on all ships that went near England or France. 8 U.S. ships were sunk. Back to our chapter. After more than 2 years, the war in Europe was eating soldiers and national economies and getting nowhere. U-boat warfare was making many Americans very angry with Germany and its allies. More and more people in the United States began to side with the Allies. The United States was under increasing pressure to enter the fray on the side of Britain and France. Americans sold war supplies to the Allies, but President Wilson still seemed determined to stay neutral. In 1916, he campaigned for president on a platform of peace. Then, on January 16, 1917, the German Foreign Minister Arthur von Zimmermann sent a telegram to Mexico City. Before it was read there, the telegram was intercepted by the British intelligence and decoded by their astonishing cryptographers or code readers. The Zimmermann telegram, as the message is known, suggested an alliance between Germany and Mexico. It was a German plot to make Mexico fight against the United States. When they won the war, as Germany was sure they would, Germany would give Texas and New Mexico to Mexico as a prize for entering the war. On the night of March 31st, 1917, Woodrow Wilson got out of bed and took his portable typewriter to the south veranda of the White House. Mrs. Wilson brought him a bowl of milk and crackers from the kitchen. Then, in the quiet of early morning, the president typed out a message that was to become famous. It was a declaration of war. Wilson said our nation had no selfish aims, and it didn't. America wanted no territory, no gain for itself. The present German submarine warfare against commerce is a warfare against mankind. It is a war against all nations. We are accepting the challenge. The world must be made safe for democracy. On April 2nd, Wilson went before Congress and spoke his message. It was a fearful thing to lead this great peaceful people into war, he said. Into the most terrible and disastrous of all wars, civilization itself seeming to be in the balance. But the right is more precious than the peace, and we shall fight for the things which we have always carried nearest to our hearts, for democracy, for the right of those who submit to authority to have a voice in their own governments, for the rights and liberties of small nations, for a universal dominion of right by such a concert of free peoples as shall bring peace and safety to all nations, and make the world itself at last free. The congressmen cheered and cheered, but not all of them. For 3 days, a few impassioned congressmen attacked the president's decision. It would turn out that Wilson and the American people had been misled by propaganda. They didn't really know what was going on in Europe, and they didn't think American troops would be needed. You can pause the video here and look over the map and then read the green page we're coming over. You can read that to yourself.